Hi, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Matt Fuller, and I'm the Director of Business and Policy here at Asia Society Texas. We're delighted to welcome all of you here tonight for this program. You might have noticed a little bit of construction on your way in, maybe a little bit different than what you're used to. This summer, we're so excited. We're going to open a new education exhibition titled Explore Asia. This is presented by the E. Rudge Allen family, and it's going to be, it's really an immersive experience. It's going to be the first of its kind in Texas, and it's going to offer guests an immersive journey across 5 countries. So China, Japan, India, South Korea, and Vietnam. It's really a tailor-made experience for students, for high school students and junior high students, but guests of all ages are going to explore this. So we're going to welcome you back in the end of summer and just experience it for yourself. It's going to be a great thing. There's interacting, you're going to be able to interact with neon signs, musical instruments, sports. There's these interactive lunch boxes literally lunch boxes that are somehow just really fun to play with. So please come back for that. And very quickly, I know we have some very dear friends and supporters in the room, but if you are not already a member of Asia Society Texas, we would invite you to become a member. Your generous support allows us to organize programs and events throughout the year in the fields of business, policy, arts, culture, education. Our programming is rooted in the educational and cultural development of our community. We trust in the power of art, dialogue, and ideas to build a more inclusive society. So very quickly, on that programming note, I want to share a couple of upcoming programs that we have that we're very excited about. Next Tuesday, May 30th, we're hosting a delegation from Western Australia for a program on the trade and investment linkages between Texas and Western Australia. So go out and have fun this weekend. When you come back into town on Tuesday, you can join us for that program. On June 22nd, we're so excited, we're launching our Energy Transition Series in cooperation with ExxonMobil. The first program will highlight the work being done across the energy industry to improve climate outcomes. So it's a very important program. And then the following Wednesday, June 28th, we will be joined by 2 former generals in the Afghan National Army. They'll share their experience in Afghanistan with a special emphasis on the time placed in the months leading up to the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in the fall of 2021. So it's a very special program. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge our fantastic sponsors. Asia Society Texas's business and policy programs are endowed by the Huffington Foundation. Presenting sponsors are Bank of America, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, United Airlines, and Muffet Blake. We would also like to recognize the University of Houston for their amazing support and partnership and really friendship that made this program this evening happen. Tonight's program is a very timely discussion on the role that the internet plays with regard to hate speech and in a post-truth society. As all of you know and all of you have experienced, the internet and our ever-expanding social media networks have brought people together from all across the world in unprecedented ways. But they've also served as platforms that have seen alarming rises in online hate speech. Tonight's program will explore this topic and examine how the rise of hate speech and the internet have contributed to what some are calling a post-truth society, or the idea that facts are secondary to emotions and personal beliefs when shaping and sharing opinions and worldviews. So it's my honor to hand the program over to Emran and get the program started. Just a quick reminder, we do have coffee and drinks in the back. Please help yourself throughout the program, and then, of course, join us after the program for a reception in the Water Garden Terrace. So, thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for the thorough introduction. It's a hard show to follow because of the interactive lunchboxes, but we're happy to be with you all today. Sorry we're starting a little bit late, but I understand we have enough time to make up at the end. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Emran El-Badawi. I serve as chair of the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and associate professor of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Houston. On behalf of the Asia Society of Texas and the Department of Modern and Classical Languages at the University of Houston, I welcome you all to the third of 4 summits examining hate speech as a global crisis. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, please allow me to briefly familiarize you with this urgent project and unique opportunity. Speech is power. Power is to persuade, to convert, and to compel. These are the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who opposed slavery and saw the American Civil War as a necessary revolution. Today, the power of speech reverberates over expanding networks of media, government, and culture. Its power has been harnessed by both good as well as evil. Hate speech is an insidious part of cyberspace, political discourse, and discriminatory policies and practices. It is deadly, and when mobilized on a large scale, has led to genocide, and is today weaponized for cyber warfare. It is little surprise that these alarming realities became the subject of the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech in 2019. This project, including today's proceedings, is a cutting-edge international study on the most urgent hate speech challenges facing our world today. It's comprised of 3 parts. So 1, media contributions by experts that will slowly but surely be published on our website, which is already functional. 2, 4 hybrid summits. This is number 3. And then the 3rd part would be a book publishing proceedings and findings to be utilized as a resource for policymakers, researchers, and the informed public at large. So the idea, again, is this project that I'm directing is to funnel the expertise of world, renowned specialist researchers so that we can actually tackle this problem methodically, through policy, through science, technology, and academia, of course. This project would not be possible without the generous support, long-standing leadership, and vision of the Baniak Charitable Foundation. In the audience today is none other than Dr. Milton Baniak and Mrs. Lori Baniak and their daughter, Deborah Baniak. Their philanthropy has nurtured so many causes, including interfaith dialogue, publishing, and education programs at every single level. They have supported many institutions, not least of which is Rice University and U of H, including my conversation partner here, and they've touched so many lives. So ladies and gentlemen, please, let's begin today by showing our appreciation and heartfelt gratitude for the Baniaks. I also want to thank our partners and collaborators. They include, of course, Asia Society, including Matt Fuller and Jim Tyler, who is, of course, works with the Baniaks and who couldn't be here today. I remember him fondly, and he's, of course, instrumental to the project. I now turn to our panel, and I want to begin by saying, of course, this is not an all-male panel, okay? Just so happens by coincidence that myself and Professor Vardi here are males, but of course we have our distinguished women colleagues on the Jumbotron here. We can't see them, so please forgive us. It's a hybrid event. We do the best we can looking over. But I'm going to introduce, first and foremost, Numa Dhamani. You'll see her, of course, on your screen, is an engineer and researcher with expertise in information warfare, security, and privacy. She's advised startups and nonprofits, served as principal investigator on various DARPA programs, and contributed to multiple international peer-reviewed journals. Her analysis has appeared in several media outlets, including the New York Times and the Washington Post. Currently, Numa is a principal machine learning engineer at kungfu.ai. That's got to be the coolest thing to say in the world. Come on. An AI consultancy firm. Previously, she worked on mitigating online abuse at Twitter, on identifying and demonetizing online disinformation at the Global Disinformation Index, and on detecting online extremism and influence operations at Yonder, formerly known as New Knowledge. So welcome to Ms. Dhamani. We'll hold our applause until the end. And I'm sure you can see already how that caliber of expertise is very much relevant to our discussion today. Next, I'd like to introduce Chelsea Horne, who is Senior Professional Lecturer at American University. Her areas of research encompass writing, digital rhetoric, communication, information literacy, privacy, big data, and internet governance. Recent work has appeared in telecommunications policy, Routledge studies in Shakespeare, and in writing spaces. As a teacher, Horne has taught workshops and master classes in 4 continents. She is a faculty fellow at the Internet Governance Lab, so a truly international CV over there. And last but not least, beside me, of course, is Professor Moshe Vardi, who is University Professor, Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Service Professor in Computational Engineering at Rice University, where he is leading an initiative on technology, culture, and society. His interests focus on automated reasoning, a branch of artificial intelligence with broad applications to computer science, including machine learning, database theory, computational complexity theory, knowledge in multi-agent systems, computer-aided verification, and teaching logic across curriculum. He is also a faculty scholar at the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. Hopefully I got that all right. Please welcome our panel. All right, friends, before I turn to our questions, which is why we're all here today, some quick announcements, of course. We're going to have a 1-hour discussion between, of course, the panelists and the moderator, followed by up to 30 minutes of audience Q&A from the audience, which is, of course, both in-person and virtual. This is a hybrid session. Questions will be gathered by note card from the face-to-face audience and via the Q&A box on Zoom. The moderator will be asking the questions, so I'll ask the questions, not you guys, unfortunately, okay? So hopefully you can forgive me for that. And then finally, we have, of course, a reception to follow in the hallway. If that sounds okay with everyone, we can get started. Yes? So each question that I will ask will be heavy, shall we say. And I will begin with the first one. There are several recent attacks against ethnic or religious groups, just in recent memory. And I can cite, by example, the Atlanta spa shootings in 2021, the Christchurch Mosque in 2019, Tree of Life Synagogue in 2018, Charleston Church in 2015, various ISIS-related attacks in 2012 to 2015, and so on and so forth. These attacks were fueled in part by terrorist propaganda spread over the internet. It's something they all have in common. As recent as this month, May 7th, a Texas gunman whose online posts embraced white supremacist and neo-Nazi ideology killed 8 people in the Dallas area. There are, furthermore, several studies showing the relationship between hate speech and hate crime. We've explored some of those subjects in prior summits. So the question is, how does hate speech proliferate on the internet? Can you share some of the ways hate speech is manifested in clear criminal behavior, as well as its less visible manifestations in society, which means they're slightly, harder to identify? So this is the first question, and I would like to direct it actually to Numa, if you don't mind answering. We'll start with you. I can't see you, or I have to reach over.
No, perfect. Well, thank you for having me this evening. I'm really excited to be here. And first, I would just like to start by defining hate speech. So I'm going to use the broad definition from a study that we released when I was working at the Global Disinformation Index, also known as GDI, if you hear me say that. So hate is defined as the beliefs or practices that result in attacking, maligning, delegitimizing, or excluding an entire class of people on the basis of immutable characteristics, including their ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or disability. So then your related definition of hate actors becomes that hate actors are understood to be individuals, groups, or communities which actively and overtly engage in the activity that is defined as hate. So as well as those who implicitly attack and promote hostility and hate crimes towards such classes of people, for example, through the use of conspiracy theories and disinformation. So that being said, an important way that hate actors operate online is through social and participatory media, which enables them to find each other and then exchange fringe viewpoints. They then further collaborate on media production and dissemination. So we see this on mainstream social media sites like Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, which can be used to spread extremist ideas to large groups of people. So for example, on Twitter, we see extreme ideologies shared in private groups, which are then circulated in personal networks. Then we have a lot of ideologically driven blogs and websites, which can also be an influential source for many people, especially since a lot of these sites tend to interact extensively by linking to each other or just engaging with each other's content. So for example, you've got Alex Jones' Infowars, which is a prominent source for many conspiracy theorists. There's also the Daily Stormer, which is a neo-Nazi website where the community that interacts with that content calls themselves the Stormers, and they carry out actions, usually harassment campaigns, at the request of the site's founder. Then we've got many online forums and message boards for people who want to discuss these extremist ideas. So there's Discord, which has large communities that are devoted exclusively to far-right causes. And then you can also find very similar communities on Reddit. So we've got 4chan, we've got 8kun, which are user-generated message boards, and there are also specific white supremacy message boards. And then, of course, there's fringe social media sites where we've got Gab, Parler, and Truth Social. And what we see is often extremist and violent ideas jump from a lot of these fringe sites and platforms to mainstream social media. So if we kind of go off of that idea, on March 30th, 2022, there was a mass shooting by a young man at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, where he killed 10 dark-skinned people and wounded 3 more. So the 18-year-old actually detailed his attack on Discord and streamed it live on Twitch. The video was actually removed from Twitch in about 2 minutes, but then it resurfaced on 4chan, and then it spread to other fringe platforms like Gab, and then ultimately made its way to mainstream platforms like Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook. In his writings, he actually describes his path to radicalization, where many of the images and content that he uses has actually circulated online for years, including on sites like Reddit and Twitter. He talks about how he mostly gets his news from Reddit, and then at the start of the pandemic, and then he joins 4chan, and then he's further exposed to toxic and extremist ideologies. So enough of that content usually remains on mainstream sites where users can find more extreme sites or content just like a couple clicks away. Another example would be the deadly attack at the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, which was the result of baseless claims about widespread voter fraud in the 2020 US presidential election. So following that, ProPublica and the Washington Post released an investigation on the role that Facebook played, specifically Facebook groups in spreading hate, violent threats, and misinformation that led to the violence of this January 6th. Hate speech and adversarial narratives, while sometimes lead to real-world harms, including violence and death, they also really undermine our trust in social, political, economic, scientific institutions, and they sow or amplify division within our societies. So we see an increase in disinformation, misinformation, we see continued radicalization, and we see growing distrust in mainstream media. And distrust in media can lead to people not having access to accurate information, which can then also have civic and political consequences. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that thorough answer to the question. Next, I would invite Professor Horne, Chelsea, if you'd like to answer.
Yes, and first I also want to send my sincere thanks for the invitation to be on this panel. This is such an important topic, and these are such important critical questions of our moment of today. So I'm really honored to be part of this important project, so thank you. Unfortunately, hate speech prospers on the internet. Studies show that lies bolstered by anger and hate spread on the internet 6 times faster than accurate, true information. And we know, as we've mentioned before, that they have real tangible harms. A recent UNESCO survey that was just from last month found that 73% of women journalists say they have experienced online violence. 73%. 20% of women journalists say they have been abused and attacked offline in connection with online violence. So here, this is really important, and we've been already highlighting this. The switch from online harassment, hate speech, cyberbullying, spam, all kinds of garbage types of speech are transitioning to the physical, in real life world. So I'm really happy that Numa gave us a description of hate speech, because here in the United States, from a government perspective, from a legislative perspective, hate speech as a phrase is complicated. How do we define hate speech? There isn't a hate speech law the way these laws exist in some other countries, like France, Germany, Brazil, and many others. The First Amendment in the United States protects freedom of expression, but I also just want to clarify, because sometimes people forget that it's freedom of expression from government censorship. It does not include private actors. Sometimes the private actors get conflated with the First Amendment. So the private sector, so Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, all the big tech companies, they establish their own guidelines and policies on allowable speech, including, if they choose, their own definitions of hate speech. And these have evolved over recent years. At first, there were no hate speech policies. Then they just said, Facebook had 1 year where they just said no hate speech, but they didn't define it. And now Facebook, just as an example, has a very concrete definition of what hate speech is on their platform. So when it comes to the First Amendment and freedom of expression, the key concept is this marketplace of ideas. And it's this idea that the truth will always rise to the top when there's a competition or a market, how we say, of ideas in public discourse. Many lawyers, judges, scholars, politicians, they've all argued that what we need is more speech to counter the bad, or in this case, hate speech that we're talking about, not governmental censorship that would come from a hate speech law. We currently already have narrow carve-outs, such as speech that is defamatory, or speech that may cause, in the phrases, specific, serious, imminent harm. And so that's the emergency test, that it has a tangible, imminent harm. These types of speech are not protected. And so it's not that the First Amendment covers all types of speech. There are these carve-outs. But sometimes, even in the case of true threats, anonymity and pseudo-anonymity that happens online can complicate the process of holding people accountable. And what's perhaps most concerning with this technology is the speed and scale possible through which these social media networks can transfer information and the overall amplification opportunities in this online sphere. Many studies have shown that social media platforms prioritize polarizing content because it creates more user engagement. So maybe in the marketplace of ideas, the truth will win out in the end. But what happens in the meantime? What damage, physical, mental, emotional, reputational, may happen as we're waiting for the truth to come out? And with the internet, many digital objects like video, audio, memes, deepfakes, AI-generated content, so on and so forth, these have long-lasting, if not permanent lives. And as Numa was hinting at, like the way that even if they're removed from a website or removed from a search engine, they may have already been copied and shared elsewhere, and they can be replicated almost indefinitely from that perspective. So like kind of once something's on the internet, it's incredibly difficult to get it off. So the lies will continue to be perpetuated even when the truth comes out. And then just finally, I'll wrap up here, like time and again, like one of the solutions that's offered to a victim of harassment, cyberbullying, and hate speech, one of the most common things that they're told to do is to just get off the social media, to take a break. But what this is doing is it's silencing the victim, and it impinges upon their own free speech and their own ability to tell the truth. So I just wanted to highlight as one of the solutions that's sometimes proposed as a concerning solution.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Horne. So many insights, and especially the marketplace of ideas is something that reminds me of a similar idea with the marketplace of ideas in scholarship. The idea is that good scholarship and good ideas rise to the top, or the truth rise to the top, but clearly it's not a straightforward journey. Finally, we turn to Professor Vardi. Moshe?
So my view is that hate speech on the internet is an outcome of a cultural, political, and economic forces. So let me start with cultural. We have a society that is obsessed with efficiency. Think about why were we not ready for COVID-19? Well, it's going to cost money. There were ample warnings. You can go back and find testimonies in front of the Senate during the George W. Bush administration about the coming pandemic. But it costs money to get ready for a pandemic, and maybe there won't be a pandemic. So we like efficiency, we pay little attention to resilience. How do we build resilience into our systems? That obsession with efficiency in computing in particular led to the desire to remove friction. Friction is bad. All friction is bad. Imagine I go to my colleagues across the engineering quad at Rice and tell the mechanical engineer, friction is bad. You should eliminate all friction from cars. They'd say, you're out of your mind. How do you want the tire to rotate on the road? You need friction there. In the drive shaft, we want to eliminate friction. We need to think about it in a nuanced way. The right friction, in the right place, in the right time. In computing is all, no friction. So what was Facebook motto? Frictionless sharing. Let's make sharing as easy as possible. Well, what do people, I think previous speaker, people share more negative emotions information than positive emotion information. If I'm outraged, I'll share. Then we have a culture especially in tech that fetishes disruption. The phrase is disruptive innovation. There are so many business proposals start. Let's disrupt this. Let's disrupt this industry. And that led to Facebook motto for many years was move fast and break things. Now break what? If you're going to break their payroll system, you know what? I don't care. But if they're going to break American democracy, well, I do care. Move fast and break things is irresponsible. And then we have another part of the culture. You go back to the roots of the internet culture. It goes back to the 70s, the hippies. And out of this anti-establishment culture came up the mantra, information wants to be free. Now, information doesn't want anything, it's just information. But when Google started this wonderful web search engine, how are they going to make money? Advertising. How does Facebook make money? Advertising. And now, for Facebook to make more money, they need to keep you engaged. So what they do is maximize user engagement. So because information is free, we need to capture your eyeballs, capture your attention. And then on top of it, Congress passed in 1996 the Telecommunication Act, and there was these young computing platforms, and they said, what are we going to do when people post stuff that we cannot manage it? So the Section 230 says, well, if I have an obscene phone call, we don't hold the phone company responsible. So platform owners are not responsible for the content that's put on the platform. Legally, they're not responsible. Now, the fact they do something about it is more for public relations. Legally, they're not responsible. This was just confirmed by the Supreme Court. On top of it, the Justice Department has not applied antitrust action since they tried last time in Microsoft in the 90s. So now if you look, what are the biggest corporations in the United States? These are all tech corporations. So we have market concentration, we have trillion-dollar corporations, and what's their mission in life? This is capitalism 101, maximize profit. So you take all of this together, and you get a witch's brew that results in hate speech proliferating on the internet, and it's not always easy to go to find a causal link between hate speech and the outcome, hateful actions. But there have been, for example, last year, Amnesty International came up with a report about the massacre that happened against the Rohingya people in Myanmar. And they did a research, and they found the causal connection between hate speech and killing people.
Thank you, Professor Vardi, for a very sobering assessment and for connecting the technical with the economic. Really quite sobering facts. And I recall, of course, the spectacle almost of watching Mark Zuckerberg speaking, testifying before the Congress, talking about how Facebook was used, for the massacre of Rohingyas with a straight face or, with a whatever face, and, it was just business as usual. Of course, there are always some there is some penalty associated with it, but you know, these large corporations are very powerful, and they really do control, in some cases, you know, the way the world works. And I'll pivot in this case to our second question. So, during COVID, there was a proliferation of what many are now calling the infodemic. So you have the pandemic, you have the infodemic, which is what? An explosion of fake news, particularly in relation to COVID. At the same time, hate crimes reported against AAPI community, so the Asian American Pacific Islander group, rose to unprecedented levels. So it's not something we've seen in recent memory. Social media amplifies this misinformation and hate speech and allows it to spread at an unprecedented pace. It's something that the speakers have mentioned already. My question is, do we live in a post-truth society today? Does the internet's global power make fake news, hate speech, and subsequent echo chambers and alternate realities inevitable? So this is sort of the Frankenstein question. Maybe if we can begin with you, Professor Horne?
Yes, certainly. So I actually really love this question because it lets me be my optimist and my cynical self. The Ruha Benjamin has a great quote where it says that technology will either save us or slay us. And it's very catchy, that description there. So my answer is going to be somewhere along the same lines. So are we in a post-truth society? I would say yes and no. No is the optimist sense that we're not in one, because there's still journalists, scholars, researchers, projects like this one, and many others who are doing the incredibly important and the sometimes incredibly difficult and dangerous work of finding and reporting truth and facts. So I would say that there's certainly hope that we're not in a post-truth society, or if we are, then that we're already working towards solutions. So that's my optimist perspective on that. At the same time, I do think that this post-truth society label can be quite useful beyond just being a catchy soundbite, because it helps us acknowledge some of the challenges and obstacles that are facing us. So the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, it named post-truth as its word of the year in 2016. I'll leave that just as a fact there. So I think that thinking about being in a post-truth society makes us more aware and be more active consumers of this information that we're bombarded and flooded with on a daily basis. So something to keep in mind is that all the phenomena that you just mentioned, these are not new. So if they are inevitable, it's probably not solely because of the way the internet or social media networks work, though it's well documented that these phenomena are certainly amplified online. There's been fake news for millennia, and all these other terrible things that happened in real life as well. And I also put fake news into scare quotes because it's become more of a rhetorical umbrella to refer to a lot of things, such as discrediting reputable news organizations or making distrust in truth and fact. So fake news, I always put, when I'm speaking, like a scare quotes around them. So rather, disinformation studies and disinformation has become the term that many scholars have adopted. And CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the United States, distinguishes between misinformation, this is inaccurate information, so false information, malinformation, which is information that may be based on fact, but it's used out of context or it's manipulated and it has the intent to harm. And then disinformation, if this was a Venn diagram, is in the middle. This is deliberately misleading or inaccurate information with the intent to harm. So a way to remember that's easy is D for deliberate or to deceive with disinformation. So bringing it back to post-truth though, in this disinformation disorder, the disinfodemic, there's a lot of terms that scholars have come up with to describe this murky information ecosystem that we live in. So something I think about a lot in this information ecosystem is this phenomenon that Danielle Citron and Robert Chesney call the liar's dividend. So in an information environment that's overly saturated with deepfakes, disinformation, manipulated audio, and who knows what else is going to come up soon with this AI-generated content that we have. In a world where anything can be false, how do we know what's true? And that question is a liar's dividend of how they can get away with some lies because we question that it could be true, it might not be true. So then we had these two extremes. People who are misled into thinking that lies are true. And at the same time, we have this immense growth of distrust in information, even when it might be true. And I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Horne, and for the semantic analysis as well, and making us think about words. I myself have to, I think, go back and maybe rewrite some of my papers, but that's a separate issue altogether. Next, Ms. Dhamani, can you answer? Yeah, next one.
Yeah, Chelsea, thank you so much for that very thoughtful answer. I really enjoyed your analysis of a post-truth society. And thank you for all of the definitions there. It's super helpful. Because I think Chelsea made a lot of the points that I was going to. No, thank you for doing that. I'm going to, I think, focus more on the second part of the question. So I think adversarial narratives spread across various forms of media. Chelsea pointed that out a bit. So this includes social media platforms and also mainstream news. So while you have content that can sometimes be created by online disinformation actors, it can also be created by news media outlets. That being said, social media algorithms that assist with amplifying and speeding up the spread of content is a significant problem. I know that both our panelists did touch on just social media engagement and how algorithms work, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Instead, I'm going to go to, I think, as long as actors are motivated, they will usually find a way to manipulate media, right? So this could be propaganda, where people circulate content to push their worldview. This could be spreading false information to make money. This could be politicians pushing a certain narrative or framing. This could be groups who try to affect public opinion, or it could be trolls who do it for fun and attention-seeking behaviors. But usually your motivation is ideology, money, and or status and attention. As platforms are getting better at detecting and responding to manipulated behavior, we are now seeing these actors innovate in new and interesting ways. So Chelsea hinted about some of this, but now actors are using AI-generated profile pictures to make attribution more difficult or almost impossible. So in December 2019, the first takedown of AI-generated images was actually by Facebook for a network that was tied to the Epoch Media Group that uses mass AI-generated profiles. On Twitter, we are seeing things like handle switching, where actors can now switch their handles while retaining followers, which also makes it difficult to assess their prior activity. So now, just kind of with an increase with using generative AI models for automated content creation, there is this additional concern of enabling new tactics of influence and making influence operations more tailored, more persuasive, and then just cheaper at a larger scale.
Okay, thank you so
much. And I will end there.
Yeah, okay, very good, okay. And thank you again for supplementing, and handle switching is something that I just learned about recently. And okay, thank you so much, Professor Vardi.
So there is something that I call the linear fallacy. And the linear fallacy says that if something is good, then more of it should be better. Think of Jack Onassis, right? You can never be too rich or too thin. Yes, you can be too thin. And actually, it turns out even being too rich is not good for people. So, but if you fall into this trap, the linear fallacies, and you think information is good, most of us, especially in academia, we're taught about information and knowledge. That's what we do. So you think, okay, information is good, so more information is better. But all of us have limited capacity to absorb information. What happens when we are flooded with too much information? So there is this TMI, too much information. We think somebody telling me personal detail that I don't really want to know, but there is just too much stuff is coming my way. And now I have to find a way to filter it. And so think what happened when the fairness doctrine was abolished. So until 1987, if you own a broadcast channel, ABC, CBS, NBC, you had to cover the news in a balanced way. So essentially your choice between ABC, CBS, and NBC would have been which anchorman, they were all men at the time, which anchorman do I like better? Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, I forget who was the third one, okay? But then the Reagan administration said, we have cable TV, we have lots of cables, we don't need this anymore. And now consider one person who lives on just watching MSNBC, and the other one watches just Fox News. Fox News is not the most extreme to the right. You have, Newsmax, One American Network. I once arrived at the hotel and turned on TV, and there was a channel, RT. I did not know what it was about, but I watched RT for 5 minutes, and I says, I'm in some kind of alternate universe.
Yeah.
And then I realized RT was Russia Today. And now that already created what we call cognitive bubbles. But then, as I mentioned, the internet came along, and information wants to be free, so it's based on advertisement. But this advertisement is called micro-targeted advertisement. So if you do Google search, and you do a Google search, you're not going to see the same thing. It's personalized, it's called customization. The content, imagine even you and I have the same set of friends on Facebook. We will not see the same stream of information. So why? Because they want us to be engaged. So they show us what the algorithm thinks we want to see. So we create this bubble to ourselves. And social media is just very happy to dish us this thing. No, I want to show you anything you don't like. For example, you can go on Facebook and go click, and you find what is your profile. Facebook thinks that I'm very liberal. Actually thinks I'm a centrist. But Facebook thinks I'm liberal, so that's what Facebook is going to show me, the content. And people call it basically behavior modification by 1,000 small nudges. We're all susceptible to some nudges. And if it's a big nudge, we will be aware of it and we say, no, I'm not going to do that. But our behavior is being modified because we interact now with this information all the time. And we have no awareness. This is all subliminal information, subliminal advertising, how we are steered away from each other. So we look now at this country, deeply paralyzed, and some people compare the United States now to what happened in the biblical story after the Tower of Babel. People speak different languages. You hear a story from people, I go to do Thanksgiving with my family. I cannot say anything there. Anything that I will say will offend someone. So in some sense, that's how we go to this, I wouldn't call it post-truth, instead it's many-truth societies. Everybody has their own truth.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Professor Vardi, and all the speakers. And I think the third anchorman is Peter Jennings.
Peter Jennings.
There you go.
Thank you.
I'm old enough that we can overlap this.
Thank you.
This is okay, fantastic. And
You start watching news at a very early age.
There you go. See, this is where you end up, right? Well, and you took us, of course, from TMI to the Tower of Babel. So it was a good, I think, tour de force. And we're able to, I think, to go to our third question. So several AAPI organizations are beginning initiatives to combat hate speech directed at the AAPI community. At the same time, we can see an increased presence of AAPI influencers and content creators in media. So this is really about influencers and content creators. And the question is, can you put this rise in context? This sort of efflorescence, this abundance of these creators, and to what extent can these influencers be activated to fight online hate speech? Maybe we can begin with you, Professor Vardi, if we can change the order.
So I'm deeply skeptical. My analogy would be, imagine we hear there's a hurricane coming to Houston, and we say, everybody in Houston, go outside with your umbrella. We're going to stop the hurricane with our umbrellas. I don't think it's going to work. So the reality is that information sharing and the differences between what happened, there's always negative information out there, but you can imagine what happened even maybe 30 years ago. If I want to publish some neo-Nazi pamphlet, how will I publish it? I will send it to New York Times, they'll reject it. At the end I may make my own copies, go distribute to the neighborhood, most people will throw it away. The reach that we have today, because remember, information wants to be free, maximize your engagement, frictionless sharing, the speed in which information can spread, and And the thing that people click more is negative information, hate speech, fear-mongering. We talk about hate speech, but there is analogs of this. It's just making people very afraid, talking about crime wave, where the data doesn't support it, just to make you very afraid, manipulating you by fear. And as I mentioned before, hate speech is really driven, the crisis is driven by what I call techno-socio-political-economical system. And in a nutshell, remember, we have a small number of very, very large players, a tremendous amount of economic power. They're trying to maximize their profits. That's what corporations do. And they do it by maximizing user engagement. And part of the dilemma now, there is something I would call the social trilemma, not dilemma, trilemma. Who should moderate speech on the internet? Do we want the government to do it? We say, no, this smacks of censorship. Do we want to have no moderation? There will be horrible stuff there. So do we leave it to the corporation? And so, when Twitter kicked Trump after January 6th, after the January 6th insurrection, Twitter kicked Trump off Twitter, and people who don't like Trump cheered. Okay, finally we got rid of him. But do we want Twitter to be in the position to decide which politician have a voice and which politician do not have a voice? So we don't like the government to make the decision. We don't want business to make the decision. And we don't like no one making the decision. And this is the social trilemma. And in the next question, I'll try to think of what can we do. Nevertheless, what is it we could do about the current situation?
Okay, thank you so much, and for introducing, of course, the trilemma, because the problem is not complicated enough. Next, Professor Horne.
Yes. I think I'm going to focus more on the second part of the question, so to what extent the influencers can be activated. Thinking about it from this perspective, in the US, because again, things are very different regarding speech globally, so speaking from the US perspective, the courts have often advocated for more speech rather than silencing of the speech of others as the solution. So again, we have those very narrow carve-outs for defamation and the emergency test for things that can be criminal types of speech. So what this more speech rather than silencing of other speech, it's called counter speech. And this is just any speech that counters a message with which one disagrees. So again, lawyers, politicians, scholars, there's a large contingent of people who are recommending this counter speech as the solution. And so influencers in their position of power of having those massive networks and followers, and they're able to use the amplification of those platforms, their counter speech could have significant impact. But so can everyday users as well. So the counter speech is for everyone. So it's this idea of to continue to speak and to not be silenced. Because again, some of the solutions are when there's encountering hate speech, cyberbullying, harassment, spam, etc., is to remain silent. And that's actually could be considered a view of moral high ground. So counter speech is suggesting instead that to continue to speak, to continue to try to be heard. Now, I also want to acknowledge that that sounds very good, perhaps, but it requires an incredible amount of labor on whoever or whichever communities are the ones who are taking on that counter-speech position. And sometimes it can be difficult and dangerous work. So I always think it's important to keep that sort of acknowledgement when we give the solution of counter-speech, because it's not just an easy fix. Education also is an important one to continue to educate people about marginalized communities and the types of hate speech, hate crimes that are being weaponized against them. And something I was reading Nadine Strawson's book on hate, and something that she suggests is, this is her quote, to have thicker skin on behalf of ourselves and thinner skin on behalf of others. And I think it's an interesting solution, more the second part here, this idea of where this comes into counter speech, of speaking out when we see hate being pushed against other groups other than ourselves or against other people. So I think that what she's tackling here is a sense of community building, of collective action, of connective action that's able to take place on the internet. So I think that her suggestion there can be very helpful. We think about that collective action and how influencers in their position as network, sometimes they're called gatekeepers, in a positive way, not as a gatekeeper of information, but that of the ability to push network information out. So that's a positive view of it. And that position, that they could be people who could help bring collective and connective action together.
Thank you so much, Professor Horne. You're reminding me, of course, that you cited, of course, Nadine Strawson. It's a terrific book on hate speech, and also the importance of creating community and collective action, because there is the problem of burdening victims and those most afflicted by whatever harm on sort of liberating themselves, right? That they themselves have to do the work to, to make their plight known and to resolve it. So thank you again for putting that into a much larger context. Ms. Dhamani.
Yeah. So there are several studies now that actually outline how communities of color are just unfairly targeted and impacted by adversarial narratives and hate speech in the United States. The Asian American Disinformation Table actually released a landscape report in 2022 where they discuss how disinformation is not race neutral and how efforts to spread disinformation exploit the concerns of communities of color. As Chelsea mentioned, we already know that a lot of media literacy efforts are a promising way to combat adversarial narratives. They are unlikely to solve the crisis alone, but when used in combination with other strategies, they can actually be really effective. Instead of just teaching individuals to trust or distrust specific sources, literacy efforts can teach individuals to understand a piece of a content's origination, credibility, the context that surrounds it, to help decipher how much attention it should receive. So a successful media literacy effort should lead to discriminated trust. And that means that it should not only decrease an individual's trust in false news, but then also increase their trust in true news. Efforts to combat hate speech should work with the communities that are being targeted to be able to develop interventions that are true to communities' needs. I'm going to wrap up with answering the influencer's question, and a recent peer-reviewed article in the Harvard Misinformation Review actually discusses designing interventions for communities of color, and one of the recommendations is to collaborate with trusted individuals from social media networks and ethnic media outlets. And this is because many people receive information from informal media sources, such as social network platforms. And because hate speech and disinformation can be accidentally propagated by individuals within their network, trusted messengers can actually play a pretty significant role in stopping their spread.
Thank you so much. Okay, and again, for the broad approach to media literacy and again, shared responsibility. Okay. I want to remind everyone actually that you can, if you feel questions percolating, you're welcome to maybe raise your hand. Anusha, can you show where you are? Okay, so the pens and the note cards are available if you have questions. If you're on the Zoom chat, if you're on the Zoom version, you're welcome to write your questions in there as well. I can see there are lots of questions coming up right now. Fantastic. This will give me time to slowly but clearly move towards our last question, on my last question at least. I know we'll have others. And that's looking towards solutions. So I'd like to ask our distinguished speakers one more question. Experts argue our shared global network, the internet, needs to reach a certain balance between making the network safer while protecting free speech. We've already cited free speech a couple of times today. What is the role of digital and social media companies in creating policies and actions to control misinformation that directly feeds hate speech? Are there any current initiatives, business regulations, or legislative policies that are being proposed to regulate or moderate or monitor online hate speech? What would you, or what would your suggestion be to regulators considering this issue? Clearly, this is a big question. It's something that we're all thinking about. And I would like to begin with Professor Horne.
All right. It is a massive question. And I think if there were a concrete answer, I mean, I would be getting the Nobel Prize today if we're able to do this. So I think it's important I'm going to paint some pictures here to think about the way that the current structure is. So because when social media platforms were first developed, many had, compared to today, little to no policy guiding the content on their platform. So if you want to do a fun deep dive, you can go back and look at the privacy policies of Facebook is perhaps one of the oldest ones. What they had from 2004 and 2005 is very short compared to what they have today. So it's actually kind of fun to compare to see the evolution over time of how privacy discussions have changed, terms of service have changed, and the community guidelines or community standards. Because in the US, we're going back, so Facebook, private sector. In the US, we have some of the strongest free speech laws from a government perspective. The responsibility to govern speech online has fallen primarily by default to social media companies. And so they weren't really prepared for this. And this is kind of the move fast and break things mentality that was mentioned before. So some tech companies, they say that they don't want to be the arbiters of truth. That's the quote from Mark Zuckerberg from 2020. But the reality is that these big tech companies do have immense power. I mean, they are talking about content moderation requests in the millions per month. They're doing more content moderation, or from different perspectives, censorship than some governments do themselves, just by sheer quantities. So it's not just the social media platforms. And when we think about content moderation, though, often what comes to mind is Facebook and Twitter. We talked about the deplatforming of then President Trump from many social media company platforms. So that was the deplatforming of an entire user. That's one way of that social media companies, the private sector, is tackling concerns about, again, a variety of social ills online. But there's other infrastructure intermediary. Well, we have Cloudflare, which is a cybersecurity company. They cut service to the Daily Stormer in 2017 and to 8chan in 2019. Notably, it doesn't cut service directly to those platforms. What it does is that it removes the cybersecurity layer, so that way then other actors can come in and then they take down the website. So they didn't necessarily themselves remove those websites from the internet, but their removal of services allowed it to happen. More recently, we had Amazon Web Services cut service to Parler, which took the platform offline. When Amazon Web Services cut their service, it just immediately takes the platform. So that is an instantaneous thing. The reasoning that Amazon did this was that Parler had violated the terms of service by not addressing the increase in violent rhetoric and the incitement to violence. So here we have, beyond the information intermediaries that we call like social media platforms, we have internet infrastructure intermediaries that are taking on this content moderation role. And so this pushes and refocuses our attention further down the internet stack. So these are just some considerations when we're talking about regulation, concerns that we're thinking about the entirety of the internet stack. And then just briefly, like some of the suggestions that have come from the private sector and from government and also from civil society, they focus primarily on content moderation. And there's a lot of challenges to content moderation. It's shown to be a matter of judgment, and it's ultimately subjective. Researchers have found time and again that these are inconsistent applications of content moderation policies across the different platforms. Also, we know that if it's a human who's the content moderator, and we know that a lot of tech companies just cut their content moderation teams by the thousands, we know it's well documented of how traumatic and difficult that job is. Imagine hours upon hours each day having to look at some of the most horrific things that exist on the internet. If we're looking at a machine, so AI, machine learning, that's going to be doing the filtering here, we need to think about how that works. Speech, including hate speech, can be contextual. How do we select the keywords that may be filtered out? And if we're filtering before someone speaks, it can kind of border on impinging on their freedom of expression, again, in the United States. So we're kind of bordering on prior restraints there. We're thinking about pre-filtering out select keywords. Then we also have these kind of situations where, this is an example. Someone who was attacked with vitriolic hate speech may record and upload a video of their experience in order to seek community support. But that video will get flagged, very likely, and taken down as hate speech, even though that wasn't the intent of that victim sharing that video. They were trying to be heard and show that they were witnessing this horrific event. But it has the opposite effect, that they're being silenced again. So it's just one of those kind of tricky situations with determining what exactly is hate speech when it comes to a content moderation perspective. So as a guiding principle, we just need to think about the question I would suggest to policymakers is to really think carefully about this balance between freedom of expression and also all of the, I'll just lump it under hate speech here as a phrase here, all of the hate speech that's happening online. And to make sure that the balance is very carefully thought out and that there's not unintended consequences of any potential policies that might silence more people or create a chilling effect on those who perhaps were not the intent of that policy or law.
Thank you so much, Professor Horne. Again, very, very nuanced answer and complicated given all the realities and even bewildering. But thank you so much again with content moderation. Those of us who use social media have probably had things taken down because of, I don't know, music copyright or something, you know. And so we're familiar with how it has a potential to be useful, but can really be sloppy and, you know, imprecise in many cases as well. So thanks for bringing that up and for, you know, the rather daunting task of having those in charge really think carefully. Professor Vardi.
So as I've tried to argue before, the hate speech crisis is driven by current techno-economical system. And therefore, to address it, banded is not going to work. We have to go to the roots of the problem, which is our current techno-economical system, where we have a very small number of very large corporations. Now, the modern corporation emerged in the early 19th century, and pretty soon people discovered corporations do not like competition. I mean, the idea of invisible hand and competition is very nice. Corporations do not like competition. So 20 years after Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, there were 6,000 telephone companies in the United States. 20 years later, there was one. People call it TPC, the phone company. And eventually, we developed the Sherman Act, we developed mechanism to bust trusts. Because we realized that the free market does not work well if you have monopolies. Now, for some reason, first under the Reagan administration, and then after that, probably because of the Microsoft debacle, there has not been a serious attempt to bust trust, to bust the monopoly of the tech companies. And you can try to do antitrust activity in two ways. One is take Meta on Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. So one company controls the speech about the third of humanity. This is immense power. Mike Zuckerberg has more power in terms of speech moderation than Xi Jinping. So one is, to me, easy. Spin off Instagram, spin off WhatsApp. Alphabet, separate YouTube, you know, they bought, all of these new companies, they bought them. They should never have been allowed to buy them. Now, this is what I would call a horizontal splitting. The vertical splitting is a bit more nuanced. If you think of what happened to maybe take Facebook, one is it's a repository of all this information. But they have also the algorithm, the content moderation algorithm. Now you could imagine that they open an API and they allow competition for content moderation. I don't need to have just the content moderation on Twitter that Elon Musk thinks I should be getting. I want to choose, maybe you'll have a better idea for content moderation.
I think I will.
I'm sure you will.
I think so, I will.
I'm sure you will, okay? So there will be competition for content moderation. Right now, for content moderation, there's really no competition. And in some sense, there's very little competition there. It's the same argument that we've heard before. People say, get off Facebook. Well, that's today. Much of communication is happening is on Facebook. You tell me to get off Facebook. I'm being thrown out because other people are doing offensive things. So we need to basically create more consumer choice. Right now, there is not enough consumer choice. a market concentration, and it's both horizontal and vertical. Bust the trust, I say.
Okay, thank you
Somebody
so much.
offered me a Nobel Prize in economics, therefore.
Okay. Well, okay, so 2 Nobel Prizes this evening. Everyone keep track, okay? And thank you again, Professor Vardi, for, at the end, a very clear and powerful, more consumer choice. You're reminding me also of discussions I've had with some of my, I think I would do better than Elon Musk. Please let him know I said that. I'm just kidding, of course. But
I'm going to tweet it tonight.
But, the idea that you have the internet, which is sort of this network of everyone's voice, it should somehow be humanist and democratic, but it's the most corporate, manifestation. How did this come about? But again, thank you for, I think, bringing our attention to the sort of, monopolistic tendencies of the corporation. And finally, Ms. Dhamani.
So an analogy that we hear sometimes is how social media should be a public square. And the public square metaphor is just an unrealistic expectation on what social media is or should be. It's also worth noting that a real public square has also been moderated, right? So for example, with public nuisance laws, with noise ordinances, Chelsea discussed how nuanced and difficult the problem of content moderation is. I've worked with several trust and safety teams, so it's a very hard and a very difficult problem. And platforms have spent years trying to develop content moderation rules that mitigate the worst of the internet while still trying to maximize free speech. As they've had to tackle new challenges on the platform, their rules and practices have evolved over the years. And there have been various platforms over the last few years that have tried to start something similar to, like, let's say Twitter, but with free speech. So things like Thread Social, but they now all have content moderation frameworks. Yes, the lack of transparency with moderation decisions and reactive policies to challenges can be really problematic, and they undermine public trust. But at the same time, not having content moderation policies is also really problematic, right? The problem of hate speech and disinformation isn't really one that we will be able to completely solve. So when defense improves, actors tend to innovate. This is something that we talked about earlier this evening. So there needs to be a serious effort on building global resilience and a continued emphasis on transparency from social media platforms, but then also an emphasis on transparency from government responses. So last year, Claire Walder, who's a prominent researcher in the space, she's the co-founder and co-director of the Information Futures Lab at Brown University. She chaired a task force on disinformation and the war in Ukraine. And they proposed a permanent global institution to monitor and study information challenges. The institution would be centrally funded, it would be independent of any government and platforms. So right now, there are many initiatives to monitor disinformation. They are often overlapping work, they often lack transparency, or they just don't have ability to respond to the problem. So ideally, this body would oversee or provide any third-party inspection mechanisms for any platform interventions, and would ideally also create some sort of crisis management event. We touched on this earlier, but we also need is an infrastructure for digital media literacy interventions and education about disinformation. So we can start to teach people how to navigate polluted information systems. So studies have shown that educational campaigns can actually be really effective. So we can teach people techniques like lateral reading, which teaches you how to verify information while you read it. So the core idea is that before you engage with the content, you need to assess what others think of it, of both the source and the claims that are made. There's also the SIFT method, which outlines steps to assess sources and trace claims back to the original content. So when we think about just regulations, I think we need to not only consider a response for the online information ecosystem itself, but also the humans that use it.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Dhamani, and for mentioning, of course, resilience, which, of course, Professor Vardi mentioned in the beginning. So we're back to full circle, and at this time, we're about 15 minutes over, but I think we're enjoying a very serious discussion here. We can go over, it's fine if everyone doesn't mind, if everyone's stomach can hold themselves a little bit. So what I'll do is we have several questions. I'd like to I'd like to try and go in order and combine some of the questions. So first and foremost, we have a couple of questions here about AI. And, has there been evidence of extremists or other state actors using, new AI for radicalization or disinformation production purposes? And do we risk, in connection to this, do we risk a pivotal nuance by closely, I'm sorry, that's the other question. What represents the greatest risk? Is it, I think, human-made or AI? So anyway, if anyone has any comments about AI, and especially if it's been leveraged by terrorist groups, propaganda, sites for harm, and if you can keep your answers ideally to a minute, maybe 2 minutes, I would appreciate it. Anyone can. Professor Vardi, you look ready.
I mean, AI is now moving by the day. Every day there are new development. I don't know of anything that people have been able to connect the dots to something started with AI and ended up with some activity. But you mentioned the speech is power. And it used to be that this power, only people had that power. I mean, just until a year ago or a few months ago, you want to translate a text from French to English, and you put it in Google Translate, and you got back a clunky English paragraph. And now you get very smooth text, and it looks like a good writer. The content is debatable. It's I've described ChatGPT as a very polished bullshitter, excuse me, but it writes very polished text. So now if we talk about being nudged, being manipulated, now this can be mechanized and automated and scaled up to an extent. I mean, what do you want? You want to manipulate to the left? You want to manipulate to the right? Just tell ChatGPT, write to me this, write to me that. And I mean, Yuval Noah Harari wrote about, we're going to reprogram humanity. AI is going to reprogram humanity because we're all suckers for stories. And I will tell us stories. So people talk about this existential risk. I'm much worried about AI moving us, nudging us, in a boosting what we've already been nudged, but boosting it to a whole new level of nudging.
Okay, so we should be terrified. Okay, that's, that's something I'm getting. Thank you. Chelsea or Numa, anything to add? If not, I can't. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so the only thing I want to add to that is that we have actually seen several instances of actors using AI-generated media. I know I mentioned one where Facebook removed a network that was associated with Epoch Media Group. There's also been others that there's been like a Russia-linked operation that has been targeting the United States that they removed. There has been other domestic operations. I know there's one that was linked to the Communist Party of Cuba, targeting the Cuban public. So we have seen instances of this over the past couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
And I have just a small one, because we're talking about AI. I also just want us to think about, like, we have to worry about AI, but also have to worry about just like very basic manipulated video. So there's something called shallow fakes. Claire Wardle came up with that term. And a very basic example is the video back a couple of years ago now that was Nancy Pelosi speaking, and it was just edited down by 75% or 50% speed. And that gave the impression that she was slurring her speech. And so that is a very basic editing technique. It's not even involving any AI generation, anything particularly nuanced or complicated. So in addition to this now incredibly powerful AI, these sort of more basic, by comparison, editing techniques and manipulation is also still remaining a big worrisome component that we have.
Thank you so much. So we're continuing, and there's a question here which I find to be urgent as well. I'm going to try and combine. So we're coming out of a pandemic. We're coming into a mental health crisis, and of course our Surgeon General declared a sort of state of crisis, especially for our youth involving social media. This was just this past week. And it's something that those of us who teach at U of H and have students, we see this in our students, we see it in our youth and our kids, and we even feel it ourselves. So as a result, what are companies doing to prioritize mental health, if anything at all, right? Especially in the wake of the pandemic. And how does data protection law change to address parental rights to children and to minors? So we have the parental role as well. The question that's related to this is, how can we teach youth, I guess, to use media and social media more critically and to do it basically in a more healthy fashion? So who would like to begin? Ladies, since you're distant, I can't see you, but I'm going to allow you if anyone wants to speak. Go ahead.
One small thing perhaps, revolving the parental controls. Companies, and Facebook in particular, is pushing out a lot of new parental controls. I think TikTok even had a commercial that ran during the Super Bowl, I think, or sometime prime time, about how they were adding in parental controls. So that is actually a private sector move that they're moving towards. From a policy perspective, a lot of suggestions have been made specifically on targeting children users of technology, of these social media platforms. So I think that there is a big push towards protecting, a desire, better said, towards protecting youth online. So I think that we are seeing that sort of cultural policy shift happening from both the private sector and from a regulatory perspective.
Okay. Any others?
Silicon Valley executives brags how they do not allow screens for children in their own homes. That tells you what it is about. I mean, there is a blood on the hand of this industry. It's not, the mental health crisis, we have between 2007 and 2017, suicide rates for ages 10 to 14 tripled. And the only explanation is what happened in 2007, iPhone was introduced. And a year later, the Facebook app showed up on the iPhone. And the way the apps are designed, they're designed to be addictive. I mean, there is an article that people wrote, I'm not analyzing it. They said, the psychological war by big tech against children. They were designed to be addictive. We've done experiment at RISE. We tell students, avoid using all devices for 24 hours and write an essay about your experience. And I, in my total naivete, total disconnect from the youth of today, thought they'll say, oh, it was wonderful, I took walks, I smelled the flowers, I had coffee with my friends. None of that. I can't find my friends. How do I find my friends without a phone? I don't know what's going on. I can't drive to the coffee shop because I'm going to get lost. So, and when you read about their experience, and then you open Wikipedia on withdrawal symptoms, you see they're all addicted to their devices. They're addicted to their devices. So the current situation with mental health crisis, I'm sorry, I mean, I can blame big tech, but we as a society allowed it to happen. We basically ran an experiment on our children. No IRB would have allowed it. IRB is the University Institutional Review Board, is an ethics board in university about anything involving human subject. And not only we've done it in human subject, we've done it on our own children. Shame on us.
Okay, powerful answer. Any others? Otherwise, I'm going to pivot to our final question since we're over time. This is the time that we have, of course. This is all the time allotted for questions. And it will change gears again and pivot towards, I think, a question that looks more towards some of the advocacy of the Asia Society. It's surprising that we are not discussing the racialized contradictions between First Amendment orthodoxy and on one end, the First Amendment orthodoxy and the infringement on the rights for equal protection for minorities. And this is, of course, from Dr. Mohan at U of H. A welcome question. Any perspectives? So again, the question is on the duplicity in considering the First Amendment.
We've seen lots of duplicity, political duplicity recently. You know, we had a party that always advocated local control. And suddenly it's local control as long as you do what we say. You know, think of the just loaded pass dictating to Harris County how Harris County is going to run elections. Now, if you're going to pass a law generally about running election, it's one thing. No, this is how Harris County, which is a Democratic county, the largest county in Texas, how Harris County should run elections. Talk about duplicity.
Yeah. So we agree there's a problem so far. Professor Horne or Ms. Dhamani? Anything to add? No? Okay. All right, friends. Well, let me move towards our conclusion. And I want to, where are we? We're now at the end of our program. We're over time. I want to thank, of course, all of you for making it here. I want to thank, of course, all the staff who made it possible. They're behind the scenes. They're in the back of the room. They include, of course, Anousheh Sadiq, Siege, Ryan, Stephanie, Hector De La Rota, Fadis, which we'll enjoy soon. Again, all of you, and please join me in giving one last thanks to our panelists. I'll say to Numa and Chelsea, we're going to miss you. We're going to eat some good food, but hopefully the next time we meet, it'll be in person and we get to break bread. Thank you so much for your outstanding contributions. We'll be in touch with the further steps. And for Professor Vardi, we encourage you to come and join us, and to be continued. So please, everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Mike, speak to the mic.
Hi folks, thanks so much for coming out. We do have another seminar coming up. We also have editorials, as I have all of your email addresses because you registered. I appreciate that. I will reach out, let you know where you can see the recording of tonight if you'd like to refer friends and see our future work. Please enjoy our food.